If you look at the behavior of TikTok as a company, it's actually doing much more to protect young people than some of the other companies are.
If you think about, lots of people don't tend to even care or understand what type of intrusive surveillance we do have within the apps on our phones. So although these strange things that are in the skies have caught the attention of lots of people, they might not be able to do that much. At least it's making people think about what they've got on their phones and what kind of permissions they're actively giving away, or maybe don't know they're giving away.
Yeah, because clearly there has been a lot of concerns raised about TikTok, but will so many of the apps that we use on our phones enable various different bodies to track what we're up to?
I've got a significant problem with this whole story and this whole attitude, this anti-Chinese attitude to TikTok. I'm not disputing that there might be some concerns about security and whether information is being passed back to the Chinese parent company, ByteDance, but the inconsistencies are so rife. Our government is currently struggling to remove Chinese involvement from our mobile networks. They've delayed shifting Chinese tech out of the 5G network. And as your listener said to you the other day, your caller said to you, your most of your home technology, you look up from where you're sat now, and I can guarantee within inches of where you're sat, there will be Chinese created technology. I expect large parts of your studio were built and made in China. Now, that's not excusing this and saying that we shouldn't be concerned and aware, but this just feels almost like sort of some kind of Chinese phobia. Just because this is the first app that has really grown out of a Chinese company, I can't see why we've developed almost hysteria over its use. There have been instances of data breaches in all kinds of companies all around the world. So to say it's awful that information is being handed back to a Chinese company, why does that make it any worse than a tech company in California breaking its rules, or a mobile phone company in the UK illegally handing over data to a journalist?
Well, I guess, Will, because people are a bit worried about what China stands for and what it might be doing with that info.
There's a challenge. Why? I understand there are many concerns about the Chinese state and many concerns about Chinese state involvement, but we need to look at bigger issues than TikTok before we start to, government ministers start standing up and suggesting that TikTok should be banned. We should be looking at the amount of technology that we're buying from China, the amount of clothes, the amount of other goods. If we're genuinely worried about the effect and impact of China and how they're treating Uyghur Muslims and all kinds of other groups of people, maybe we need to take a bigger stance as a Western society and start making some stuff ourselves. And that's the challenge here. There's a bigger issue, and the tech issue, which Jake brings up, is completely right. There's all things about permissions and concerns with our mobile devices. But I sit here as a tech expert too, somebody who's worked for some of the world's biggest social networks. If you look at the behavior of TikTok as a company, it's actually doing much more to protect young people than some of the other companies are, standing by its actions and trying to behave well.
Well, Jake, let's just talk first of all about TikTok, because in the States, we are already seeing some states deciding that they are going to ban the use of TikTok, certainly within the arms of the state governors and so on. Just explain what's happening there in the States, because they do seem to be going a lot further than here in the UK.
I think, well, concerns were raised by countries, like you say, like the US, that this data that they are collecting could be accessed by the company itself and then handed over to officials.
We should be clear that, of course, TikTok is owned by a Chinese company. I mean, it says it's a private company, doesn't it? But most companies in China are pretty closely linked into the Chinese regime.
And that's it. And if they are handing it over to Chinese officials, we've already seen that ByteDance employees have used TikTok data to track several Western journalists to discover their sources and so on. And the data that they are collecting, it's rather aggressive. So although Will mentions about other apps being quite invasive, yes, a lot of apps are, but when TikTok's in use, it has significantly more permissions that it really needs. And it grants permissions by default. But then if the user doesn't give that permission, it persistently asks. Like I say, it is rather aggressive. And the data that it's taking, I don't think many people realize that, as well as tracking contacts and likes and dislikes and so on, which you'd assume default, it's data such as name, phone number, email, age, approximate location, and mobile identifiers such as IP address. That's what is coming out of many reports, of which if that's information that is very interesting in an intelligence gathering world that we live in, a society where this data is so important. And so I think people really need to hone in on the fact that they shouldn't be giving away this information, whether it's in T's and C's or not. People aren't going to read them. They are just going to accept them. And a lot of these apps will only work if you accept all the T's and C's as well, of course.
Not just Chinese apps, though. This is the most important thing here. You're making, your points are absolutely right. But everything you said there could apply to most Meta products, most of the products made by the former Facebook. That's the challenge here. We are looking at this and suggesting there's something wrong or nefarious about a Chinese organization doing this. And I'm no apologist for the Chinese state. There's many reasons why I'd argue that if we're going to do this, we need to do it properly. But to target an app which is predominantly used by young people and suggesting there's an intelligence risk, I find this troublesome. And in the same way as organizations like Facebook have freely handed over information to the FBI in investigations and have worked with law enforcement agencies on various levels globally, that isn't very different to information being handed over to a government or state.
Will, if I could just come in there, I mean, the difference is that the FBI, the American authorities, don't repress any dissent in the way that China does and in the way that China has acted against any of those, including, for example, journalists who have exposed some of their behaviour.
Yes, but these are journalists who are using phones rife with Chinese components. And are wearing? I'm just saying, I'm in a situation here where I agree with both of you. I think there is a concern here. I'm just pointing out, having watched and monitored the government from a technology perspective for 20 years, this feels a very, 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 very strange thing for government ministers to start getting het up about and be considering banning this particular app. They probably need to get their house in order and get rid of all of the 5G equipment in the mobile networks. The Huawei kit that they said would be removed by 2024, they've just pushed it back to 2027 because they don't know who else to provide the equipment.
Yeah, I mean, that is part of the problem, isn't it, Jake, is the extent to which China has monopolized so much of the technology that we use. And we were hearing today about concerns that even the police forces across the UK are using Chinese components in things like their drones, their closed-circuit security cameras and so on.
Yeah, and Will's making a great point there, and I do stress that many apps are very intrusive, very invasive, but I think it's the way that the Chinese apps are with how they collect that data. And if they've got that link with Chinese officials, it just doesn't seem as open as what we're seeing with, say, Meta. I mean, if you're talking about the FBI coming in, that's the FBI requesting it for criminal activity, you'd assume, but not just to gather intelligence. I mean, Apple and Google do a lot to protect devices from tracking, but it's extremely difficult to use these apps without some personal data being shared. And I think we've got to teach people about how to stay that much safer with their privacy, with their settings, with their data. People tend not to care, it seems, especially the younger people, about who has their data. They don't see it as an issue. It's only when their identity is stolen later on do they realize that they should have used burner emails or burner phone numbers where possible.
Jake, do you think here in the UK that we are perhaps behind the United States and some other countries in being aware of this? As we were just hearing from Will there, the date for getting Huawei out of our 5G network has already been put back. And we've got all kinds of different Chinese components in very many other parts of our technology and our infrastructure. And for that matter, our nuclear power stations. Are we a bit late coming to this and realizing the threat?
Well, I think all the countries are aware of the threat. It's how they deal with it, or how they see that as a risk to our country particularly, maybe not as much as a risk to, say, other countries that might be being a bit more brash about the subject. So the government are clearly aware of it. I mean, you're seeing government officials being told not to use it on their phone. I mean, you try telling a young person to use TikTok on a different device, they'll look at you with a face of disgust. But of course, it is actually a safe and secure way of using TikTok if you want to. It's not illegal to use the app, of course, but to use it securely in confidence, then yeah, we should be using a separate device altogether. So yeah, we do know what is going on, but teaching the public, I think that's the difficult part here. And that's part of what I try and do every day.
Will, do you think this is a flurry that will perhaps abate, given the most recent controversy over the unidentified flying objects and the spy balloon that was shot out of the sky by the United States? Or do you think there is going to be something of a wake-up call, and perhaps our intelligence agencies, our government officials and so on will start to take the potential threat from Chinese surveillance more seriously?
Well, they're focusing in the wrong place at the moment. The government absolutely has, and members of the government absolutely now have a bee in their bonnet over TikTok and concerns about TikTok. This is the same government that is currently dawdling on trying to save the semiconductor industry in the UK. They're the most vital pieces of technology to make all of our items, our phones, our cars, everything run. Now, the UK doesn't make the most sophisticated of those semiconductors, but there's a need to make some decisions on crucial, important funding in this country, especially if we're going to try and reduce our reliance on tech that comes in from the Far East. There's a concern that Taiwan, let's say, if that falls under Chinese control, the global consumer electronics industry could be absolutely destroyed. There are bigger concerns right now than worrying about who is viewing somebody's TikTok data.
And Jake, just finally, is that a big problem that we are now so dependent on components, various bits of technology that are made almost exclusively by the Chinese, that it's going to be very difficult indeed to wean ourselves off them, even if we decide to do so?
Yeah, I would agree with that point, but I think we need to up our privacy and education on privacy across the whole internet, whether it's in accounts or in components. I think people need to be on high alert to the fact that companies and even states might want our data for intelligence gathering in the future.